The cardboard boxes stacked against my living room wall looked like tombstones marking the death of my marriage. I sat on the floor, my back against the cold radiator, holding the final divorce decree in one hand and my phone in the other. The timestamp read 3:47 p.m., exactly 1 hour after Judge Carter's gavel came down and ended 22 years of what I thought was love. My phone buzzed. Elisa's name appeared on the screen, and against my better judgment, I opened the message. Hope you enjoy your pathetic studio apartment. Mark Ellison just moved his grand piano into your old music room. The mover said it's worth more than you make in 5 years. Oh, and we're converting your practice studio into his cigar lounge. You know, for someone who actually matters in this world. Another buzz. A photo this time. Ellison standing in my home office, his Yale diploma hanging where my grandfather Walter's war medals used to be displayed. His smug face twisted into what he probably thought was a smile, but looked more like a predator examining its prey. You'll die poor and alone, the next text read. Just like your grandfather. At least he had his precious secrets to keep him company in that nursing home. What do you have? A violin and delusions of talent? I was about to throw my phone against the wall, my arm already drawn back when it rang. Not a text this time, but an actual call. The caller ID made me freeze. Where a phone number should have been, there was just a string of zeros with a single one at the end. I stared at it for 3 rings, 4 rings, 5. On the 6th, my thumb moved on its own and answered, Simon Walter Hayes. The voice was male, crisp, military precise. Each word enunciated like a bullet being chambered. Who is this? My voice came out rougher than intended, thick with the emotions I'd been swallowing all day. Mr. Hayes, this is Colonel Robert Langley from the Pentagon's Estate Recovery Division. I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. Your grandfather, Staff Sergeant Walter Hayes, completed a classified military operation in Cambodia in 1964. That operation was codenamed Night Music. My grandfather was a supply sergeant in Vietnam. He played piano in the officers' clubs. The words came out automatically. The same story my father Richard had told me 100 times. That was his cover. Mr. Hayes, your grandfather was a cryptography specialist with the 5th Special Forces Group. The mission he completed has been classified beyond top secret for exactly 60 years. As of midnight last night, that classification expired. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. What are you talking about? Your grandfather recovered something in the Cambodian jungle, something that has accrued significant value over the past 6 decades. He never claimed his compensation due to the classified nature of the operation. That compensation, with interest and adjusted for inflation, is now worth approximately $156 million. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering on the hardwood floor. I could hear the colonel's voice, tiny and distant, still speaking. I grabbed it quickly, my hand shaking. That's impossible. My grandfather died in a state-run nursing home. My parents had to take out a second mortgage just to pay for his care. Staff Sergeant Hayes made a choice, Mr. Hayes. He chose silence to protect his family and his country. But he also made provisions. The money can only be released to his direct descendant and only if certain conditions are met. What conditions? You need to come to Washington immediately. There's a Delta flight leaving O'Hare in 3 hours. A ticket has been purchased in your name. First class, window seat 14A. Your grandfather specifically requested that detail in his file. How did you even know to call me today right after my divorce? There was a pause then. Your grandfather's instructions were very specific, Mr. Hayes. We were to contact you on the day you lost everything. His exact words were, when my grandson has nothing left to lose, give him everything I couldn't claim. He's been dead for 35 years. How could he possibly know? Walter Hayes knew many things, Mr. Hayes. He was very good at predicting patterns. It's what made him invaluable to military intelligence. The question now is whether you're ready to learn what he knew. The clock started ticking the moment I made this call. You have 72 hours to complete what your grandfather started. Or the entire inheritance transfers to the Department of Defense. Through my window, I could see Lake Michigan in the distance, gray and choppy like my grandfather's eyes when he'd stare at nothing, lost in memories he never shared. I thought about Elisa's text, about dying poor and alone. I thought about Ellison's smug face in my house. Colonel Langley, what exactly did my grandfather recover in that jungle? The answer to that question is worth $156 million, Mr. Hayes. I'll see you at the Pentagon tomorrow morning. 0800 hours sharp. Bring your grandfather's journal, the one with the musical compositions. You do still have it, don't you? I looked at the one box I'd refused to let Elise touch during the divorce. The one labeled Grandpa Walter's things in my mother's careful handwriting. Yes, I have it. Good. One more thing, Mr. Hayes. Your ex-wife's new companion, Mark Ellison. His grandfather, Edward Ellison, was a defense contractor in 1964. This is not a coincidence. Nothing about your current situation is a coincidence. Your grandfather saw this coming decades ago. The line went dead. I stood in my empty apartment, surrounded by the debris of my ended marriage, holding a phone that had just connected me to a past I never knew existed. Outside, Chicago's skyline stretched toward a darkening sky. And somewhere in that maze of glass and steel, my ex-wife was celebrating her new life in my old home with a man whose family might be connected to secrets my grandfather died protecting. I walked to the box of Grandpa's things and pulled out his leather journal. Its pages yellowed with age, filled with handwritten musical compositions that I'd played on my violin since childhood. For the first time, I noticed something I'd never seen before. In the margin of the first page, written in pencil so faint I had to hold it to the light, were 5 words. For Simon, when everything ends. 3 months before that phone call changed everything, I stood on the stage at Symphony Center, my violin singing the final notes of Brahms's concerto in D major. The audience erupted in applause, 2,000 people on their feet. And in the third row, Elise sat with her hands perfectly still in her lap. She wasn't clapping. That should have been my first warning. Life at 47 had settled into a rhythm as predictable as a metronome. Every morning, I'd wake at 6 o'clock in our Lake Forest home, practice scales in my soundproof studio while Elise did yoga on the terrace overlooking the pool. The house sprawled across 2 acres of manicured perfection. Each room a testament to Elise's eye for design and my ability to afford her taste. We'd bought it 15 years ago when the Chicago Symphony promoted me to first chair violin. Back when Elise still attended my performances and meant it when she said she loved the way my fingers moved across the strings. Your grandfather would be so proud, my mother Susan had said at our housewarming, running her weathered hands along the marble countertops. Walter always said music would take you places he never could go. Grandpa Walter had been dead for 12 years by then, but his presence lingered in our family like a melody you can't quite place. My father Richard kept his father's photograph on the mantel, a black and white image of a young man in military dress, eyes sharp as winter. Next to it sat Walter's Bronze Star, though none of us knew what he'd done to earn it. He came back from Vietnam different, Richard would say after his 3rd beer at family dinners. Spent 6 months in Cambodia before his official deployment even started. Never talked about it. Just played that piano like he was trying to drown out something only he could hear. I'd inherited Walter's musical gift, but channeled it differently. Where he played jazz in smoky clubs, fingers flying over keys in improvised genius, I chose the disciplined world of classical music. Structure, precision, every note written down, predetermined, safe. Elise had loved that about me when we met at a charity gala 23 years ago. "You're not like these other men," she'd whispered that first night, her breath warm against my ear as we danced. "These hedge fund types who think money is music. You create something eternal." She was working for a small interior design firm then, hungry and ambitious, wearing a borrowed dress and fake pearls that I found endearing. I was 32, she was 29, and when she looked at me, I felt like Brahms himself. Our marriage had been good for the first decade. She redesigned our various apartments as my career grew, each space more sophisticated than the last. When we finally bought the Lake Forest house, she quit working, said she wanted to focus on making our life beautiful. I practiced 6 hours a day, performed 3 nights a week, taught master classes at Northwestern on weekends. We talked about children, but never quite got around to it. Always one more tour, one more renovation, one more something keeping us from that particular composition. The change started slowly, like a violin gradually going out of tune. Elise joined the country club, started having lunch with women whose husbands ran investment firms and tech companies. She'd come home talking about vacation homes in Aspen, yachts on Lake Geneva, private jets to Art Basel. "Did you know Mark Ellison just bought a Basquiat?" she said one evening, not looking up from her phone. $23 million for a painting. Mark Ellison, the name that would eventually destroy everything. He'd hired Elise to redesign his Lincoln Park penthouse, a job she took without discussing it with me first. "It's just one project," she'd said. "His money spends the same as anyone else's." But it didn't. His money came wrapped in attention, compliments, and comparisons that left me feeling smaller with each passing day. Ellison was 6 feet 2 inches to my 5 feet 9 inches, Yale MBA to my Juilliard degree. He'd made $40 million last year while I'd barely cleared $300,000. "Your husband's quite accomplished," Ellison said at a dinner party we couldn't avoid, his hand resting just a moment too long on Elise's shoulder. "It must be fascinating living with an artist." The way he said artist made it sound like a quaint hobby, something amusing but ultimately irrelevant. Elise laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in months, bright and genuine in a way that made my chest tighten. "That was 6 months ago. The spring Vienna tour was supposed to be a triumph. 3 weeks performing with the Vienna Philharmonic. Instead, it became the setting for my marriage's final movement. While I played Mozart in the Musikverein, Elise was playing house in Ellison's penthouse. My nephew Ethan, catching them in an embrace that would shatter everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the woman who'd once said my music was all the wealth she'd ever need. The FaceTime call from Ethan came at 2 a.m. Vienna time, while I was reviewing sheet music in my hotel room at the Imperial. His face filled my phone screen, pale and anxious, looking younger than his 23 years. "Uncle Simon, I need to tell you something." His voice cracked like he was 13 again, calling me after his father's funeral. "I saw Aunt Elise at Mr. Ellison's office building tonight. She's redesigning his office space, too," I said, setting down my violin. "She mentioned something about expanding the project." It was midnight, Uncle Simon. The whole building was dark except for the penthouse. They were on the balcony and they were, God, I don't know how to say this. They weren't looking at fabric samples. The bow slipped from my fingers, clattering against the music stand. "What exactly did you see?" "They were kissing. Like, really kissing. Her dress it wasn't completely on anymore." "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I took photos because I didn't think you'd believe me otherwise." The photos arrived seconds later. Elise pressed against the glass railing, Ellison's hands tangled in her hair, her red dress half unzipped, the Chicago skyline glittering behind them like a celebration of my humiliation. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. when she texted me she was going to bed early with a headache. I played that night's performance perfectly, mechanically, my fingers knowing the notes while my mind replayed those images. The Austrian critics called it technically flawless but emotionally absent, which seemed fitting for a man discovering his life was a forgery. The confrontation came 3 days after I returned to Chicago. Elise was in the kitchen, humming Vivaldi's Spring, wearing diamond earrings I didn't recognize. "Nice earrings," I said, setting down my violin case with deliberate calm. She touched them reflexively. "Thank you. They were a bonus from the Ellison project." "Must be some project." "Working past midnight, earning jewelry." Her face went through a series of expressions like movements in a symphony: surprise, calculation, defiance, and finally cold resolve. "You know, Ethan saw you. He works in Ellison's building, remember? Or did you forget about family while you were undressing for your client?" She set down her coffee cup with steady hands. "I wasn't going to insult you by denying it." "How generous of you. You want me to apologize?" "Fine. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but I'm not sorry it happened." She stood, smoothing her skirt with manicured hands that used to trace my face after performances. "Do you know what it's like being married to someone who loves dead composers more than living people? You spend 6 hours a day with your violin, Simon. 6 hours. Ellison spends that time building empires. I'm a musician. This is what I do. It's what you said you loved about me." I was 29. I thought passion for art meant passion for life. "But you don't live, Simon. You just perform." Even our marriage became a recital. The same movements repeated endlessly. Ellison shows me new worlds. Last week, we flew to Monaco for lunch. "For lunch? When's the last time we went anywhere that wasn't for your work?" "So, you threw away 22 years for lunch in Monaco?" "No, I threw it away for someone who makes me feel alive." "You want to know the difference between you and Ellison? When he walks into a room, people notice. When you walk in, they might appreciate your talent, but nobody fears you. Nobody needs you. Nobody's life changes because Simon Hayes exists. Except yours. My money changed your life pretty dramatically." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "Your money, Simon? Ellison makes your annual salary in a week. That house you're so proud of? His wine cellar is worth more. You're a museum piece, a relic playing relics for other relics. The world moved on, and you're still standing on stage playing music by men who've been dead for centuries." The divorce lawyer she'd hired was her father's golf partner, naturally. Illinois law favored the non-working spouse, especially one who'd sacrificed her career for the marriage. The papers were filed before I'd even processed what was happening. She wanted the house, half the retirement accounts, alimony that would gut me, and maintenance of her established lifestyle. "You'll keep your violin," her lawyer said generously. "And one vehicle." Mrs. Hayes is being quite reasonable. My mother, Susan, cried when I told her. "That woman never deserved you." My father, Richard, was more pragmatic. Walter lost everything, too, you know. Came back from the war to find his first wife had sold the family farm and vanished with another man. He rebuilt from nothing and died with nothing. I reminded him, he died with dignity, my father corrected. Sometimes that's all a man can keep. The Pentagon building rose from the Virginia landscape like a geometric giant, its limestone walls gleaming in the early morning sun. I'd taken the red-eye from Chicago, my grandfather's journal wrapped in a towel in my backpack, too precious to trust to checked luggage. The Uber driver, a veteran himself, whistled low when I gave him the destination. Pentagon at dawn, you military? My grandfather was Staff Sergeant Walter Hayes. Must have been something special to get you a Pentagon summons. If only he knew. I'd spent the flight reading and rereading Walter's journal, seeing patterns I'd never noticed before. The musical compositions weren't random. Each piece was dated, and the dates corresponded to military operations in Southeast Asia. But it was the margins that held secrets, tiny notations that looked like dynamic markings, but didn't match standard musical notation. Colonel Robert Langley met me at security, his uniform crisp enough to cut paper. He was younger than his voice suggested, maybe 50, with the kind of posture that made you straighten your own spine. Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming. His handshake was firm but brief. Before we proceed, I need to verify your identity beyond documentation. Tell me about your grandfather's piano. It was a 1947 Baldwin Spinet, mahogany finish. He bought it from a pawn shop in Raleigh after the war. There was a cigarette burn on middle C from the previous owner. What did he call his Sunday night performances at the veterans' home? I smiled despite everything. Church for the unchurched. He said music was the only religion that never lied. Langley nodded. Follow me. We descended 3 levels underground, passing through security checkpoints that grew progressively more serious. Finally, we entered a vault-like room with no windows, just fluorescent lights and a metal table holding several file boxes. Your grandfather's real service record, Langley said, opening the first box. What you're about to learn has been classified beyond top secret. Even now, certain details must remain redacted. The photographs showed Walter, young and sharp-eyed in jungle fatigues, standing with a unit of men whose faces were blacked out. Behind them, the wreckage of what looked like a small aircraft. Operation Night Music, February 1964. Your grandfather's unit was inserted into Cambodia to investigate a crashed Soviet reconnaissance plane. Officially, there were no Soviets in Cambodia. Officially, we weren't there either. What did they find? The plane was carrying an early computer system, a prototype for encoding nuclear launch sequences. But that wasn't the real prize. The pilot, Viktor Ivanov, survived the crash. He was dying, but conscious. Your grandfather spoke enough Russian to communicate with him. Langley pulled out a transcript, heavily redacted, but still readable in parts. Ivanov knew he was dying. He gave your grandfather information about Swiss bank accounts used to pay double agents. Account numbers, passwords, the works. But here's where it gets interesting. He showed me another photograph. Walter holding what looked like a metal briefcase. Your grandfather memorized everything before turning over the briefcase to command. He knew those account numbers. Could have claimed that money any time. $22 million in 1964. Can you imagine what that's worth now? Why didn't he? Because claiming it would have exposed the operation. Lives would have been lost. Your grandfather chose silence, but he documented everything in code hidden in his music. The Pentagon owed him compensation for the mission, but he never claimed it. Said it would raise too many questions, put his family at risk. And now the statutory limit on classification expired. The compensation, with 60 years of interest and Department of Defense guilt multipliers for delayed payment, stands at $156 million. But your grandfather set conditions. Langley handed me a sealed envelope, my name written in Walter's shaky handwriting. He left instructions that this could only be opened by his grandson, and only when that grandson had quote lost everything material and could gain everything essential. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, Walter's handwriting filled 3 pages. Simon, if you're reading this, your marriage has ended and you've lost your worldly possessions. I know this because patterns repeat through generations. And I saw your father's romantic nature in you. You love completely, which means you can be hurt completely. The music I left contains more than notes. Each composition maps to coordinates. Each rhythm change marks a number sequence. In Baltimore Storage Unit 447, paid through 2087, you'll find what I couldn't destroy and couldn't claim. The Pentagon money is yours regardless, but claiming what's in Baltimore means choosing truth over comfort. The Swiss accounts still exist. The money cleaned by time, but dirty in origin. Names are attached. Powerful families who built fortunes on war profits. One name will matter to you personally by the time you read this. You have 72 hours from when Langley called you. If you don't claim it, everything goes to defense. If you do, you'll have the power to correct historical wrongs or preserve historical lies. Choose wisely. Music, like truth, resonates across time. Your grandfather, Walter. The storage facility in Baltimore looked abandoned from the outside, its brick facade covered in decades of grime and graffiti. But the keypad at the entrance worked perfectly when I entered the code hidden in the third movement of Walter's Autumn Fugue, 196402228. The date of the mission combined with his service number. Unit 447 was at the end of a long hallway that smelled of rust and old paper. The lock turned smoothly despite its age, and inside a single filing cabinet stood against the wall, military green and unremarkable. On top of it sat a chess set, its pieces arranged mid-game, and I recognized the position immediately. It was the Budapest Gambit, the same opening Walter had taught me when I was 8. The Gambit means sacrifice, he'd said. You lose material to gain position. Inside the cabinet's top drawer was another safe deposit box key, this one for Baltimore First National. And beneath it, a leather portfolio containing documents that made my hands shake. Photocopies of Swiss bank statements dated 1964 through 1970, showing deposits from American defense contractors to Soviet intelligence agents. The amounts were staggering, but the names were worse. Ellison Enterprises appeared 17 times. Edward Ellison, Mark's grandfather, had sold defective helicopter parts to the army while simultaneously funding Soviet operations in Cambodia. American soldiers had died in crashes caused by mechanical failures that Ellison knew about and ignored. The profit margin on those defective parts, 43%. The blood money in Swiss accounts, $22 million. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Hayes. The voice was familiar but wrong. This is Mark Ellison. I understand you've been to Washington. How do you know that? The same way I knew your wife was vulnerable to someone who could offer her more. The same way my family has always known about Walter Hayes and what he took from that jungle. We've been watching your family for 60 years, waiting for someone to claim what doesn't belong to them. Your grandfather was a war profiteer who killed American soldiers. My grandfather was a businessman who understood that war is just another market. Your grandfather was a thief who stole evidence that belonged to the government. He documented the truth. Truth is what powerful people decide it is, Hayes. Here's my offer. Take the Pentagon money and disappear. Leave Baltimore now. Leave those documents where they are and you'll be rich enough to never think about Elise or me again. Or continue down this path and discover what real loss looks like. You're threatening me. I'm offering you the same choice your grandfather had. Silence and safety or truth and consequences. He chose silence. Be smarter than he was. The line went dead. I stood in that storage unit holding evidence of crimes that had built one of America's great fortunes and made my decision. I called Nathan, my cousin, the investigative journalist. Nathan, clear your schedule. I have the story that will define your career. The Baltimore First National Bank vault opened with ceremonial slowness. The safe deposit box was larger than I expected, and inside were the originals of everything in the storage unit, plus something more. Reel-to-reel tapes labeled Ivanov Confession, and a second set of books showing where the Swiss money went after 1970. Ellison's father had inherited the accounts, then Mark himself in 2010. But Walter had left one more surprise. At the bottom of the box was a single sheet of music, handwritten, titled Redemption Suite. When I hummed the melody, I realized it was a musical encryption of account passwords. My grandfather hadn't just documented the crimes, he'd maintained access to the money. I spent the next 24 hours with Nathan and a team of forensic accountants his newspaper brought in. The Swiss banks confirmed the accounts were real and active. The current balance across all accounts, $87 million. Clean money now, technically, but built on bones. We publish tomorrow, Nathan said. This will destroy Ellison Enterprises and Elise by extension. She's tied her future to Mark. You having second thoughts? I thought about Walter choosing silence to protect his family. Then I thought about the names on those casualty lists. Young men who died because Edward Ellison chose profit over lives. No second thoughts. But we do this smart. We publish the historical documents first. Let the public connect the dots to the present. And the Swiss money doesn't go to me. It goes to a trust for the families of soldiers who died in helicopter crashes between 1964 and 1970. All of it. Every penny. I'll have the Pentagon compensation. That's more than I ever dreamed of. The blood money goes back to the families it was stolen from. Nathan smiled. Your grandfather would be proud. Maybe. Or maybe he'd think I was a fool for choosing truth over safety. What do you think he'd say? I looked at the sheet music one more time, at Walter's careful notations, his patient documentation of horrors he couldn't prevent but wouldn't forget. I think he'd say the music was worth playing, even if the audience wasn't ready to hear it. The Washington Post ran Nathan's story on a Tuesday morning with the headline, Blood Money, How Defense Contractor Fraud Funded Enemy Operations in Vietnam. By noon, Ellison Enterprises stock had dropped 40%. By close of markets, Mark Ellison was facing federal investigation for inherited fraud and tax evasion on unreported Swiss accounts. I watched the news from my new office, a converted brownstone in Lincoln Park, where I'd established the Walter Hayes Foundation for Veterans Families. The Pentagon money had cleared the previous week, all $156 million, clean and legal, and mine. But I kept thinking about those helicopter crash reports, the faces of 19-year-old soldiers who never came home because someone decided their lives were worth less than profit margins. Elise called 17 times that first day. I answered on the 18th. Simon, Mark's been arrested. The FBI seized everything. The house, the accounts, even my car, because it was bought with what they're calling proceeds of criminal enterprise. I have nothing. You have what you chose. Please, I made a mistake. I see that now. Mark used me just like his grandfather used those soldiers. I'm staying with my sister in Naperville, in her basement. Me? In a basement in Naperville? Elise, what do you want from me? I want to come home. That house isn't my home anymore. The bank foreclosed on it after Mark's assets were frozen, and you couldn't make the payments. I bought it at auction last month. You bought our house? I bought a house. My Uncle Leonard and Aunt Clara live there now. They lost their place to medical bills, and now they have somewhere beautiful to spend their remaining years. Seems like a better use of the space than Mark's cigar lounge. She was crying now, ugly sobs that once would have broken me. What am I supposed to do? The same thing I did. Start over. The difference is you chose your ending. Mine was chosen for me. 6 months later, I performed at Symphony Center again, debuting my composition, Redemption Suite. The piece Walter had written, but never performed publicly. The audience didn't know they were hearing encoded Swiss bank passwords transformed into melody. Tragedy transformed into art. My mother, Susan, sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face during the Adagio movement that contained the names of every soldier who died in an Ellison-supplied helicopter. The trust fund I'd established had already paid out $12 million to Gold Star families. Nathan won a Pulitzer for his investigation. Ellison Enterprises declared bankruptcy after the lawsuit started. Mark got 7 years in federal prison for tax evasion, the only charge they could make stick for inherited crimes. Elise married her divorce lawyer 2 years later, a practical choice that probably suited her better than marrying for love ever had. My sister Laura asked me once if I regretted any of it. Which part? Exposing Mark or losing Elise? Both. Either. You could have taken it all and stayed quiet. Walter did. Walter didn't have a choice. The world wasn't ready to hear the truth in 1964. He kept those secrets like seeds, waiting for the right season to plant them. I just happened to be the gardener who inherited his soil. The real inheritance wasn't the money, though that changed everything in practical ways. It was understanding that Walter's silence hadn't been weakness, but strategy. He'd played a longer game than anyone realized, setting up the board so that 60 years later, his grandson could make the moves he couldn't. I still live modestly, a 2-bedroom condo walking distance from Symphony Hall. I still practice 6 hours a day, but now I also teach free music lessons to veterans' kids every weekend. The foundation has expanded to include music therapy programs at VA hospitals, using Walter's compositions to help soldiers process trauma he'd understood but couldn't discuss. Sometimes I play in nursing homes like Walter did, and I always end with Moonlight Serenade in his modified rhythm. Most people don't notice the Morse code embedded in the melody, but occasionally an old veteran will look up sharply, recognizing the pattern. Night music, one whispered to me once. You know about night music. My grandfather knew, I told him. He made sure someone would remember. The truth about inheritance is that it's never really about money. It's about the stories we carry, the choices we make with what we're given, and the courage to play the difficult passages even when our fingers shake. Walter left me more than millions. He left me proof that patient justice might take 60 years, but it does arrive, encoded in the rhythm of time itself, waiting for someone to finally play the right notes in the right order at the right moment. And that moment, it turns out, was worth everything I lost to find it. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and share it with someone who appreciates tales of justice and family secrets. Comment below if you've ever discovered something unexpected about your family's past. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of truth emerging from the shadows.